my local NHS, and I was prescribed either watch and wait or radiotherapy. By the way, it was stage 1, bulky tumor like this in my inguinal lymph node. Even though follicular lymphoma is supposedly indolent, it appeared within a month, which is very strange. Because I would have noticed it if it had been there longer. So my doctor said, okay, watch and wait radiotherapy, and of course I had been, after I got my biopsy and it said you have follicular lymphoma, I did my reading, and there's lots of stuff that's better. If I was in the US, I almost certainly wouldn't have been given, it probably would have been R2 or radiotherapy plus bendestamine or something else. So thus began my research into finding some trials just to get better care. I was a little concerned about the rate of growth, even though it was follicular lymphoma. And so I tried there's a whole raft of clinical trial matchers that all started, most of them started in the mid-20 teens. In fairness to them, prior to the advent of large language models, and so I tried all of them, and it's over a dozen. And they weren't even asking the questions necessary to do precision matching. So they would do disease stage, grade, age, gender, disease stage, grade. The best of them would actually ask about what your previous treatment was, but that's it. That's as far as it went. And of course, it's a lot more complex than that. You want to know your various labs, diagnostics, biomarkers to do a true precision match. Otherwise, you're sort of selling false hope. And of course, the way that they work is what they do is at the end, they present you with a match, and none of the matches on any of the services were actually matches. Like even as a patient, I know a lot more about follicular lymphoma now, but even as a patient, knowing as little as I did at the time, I said, no, this is clearly not a match. I can read the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and it's just not. I don't match the eligibility criteria. And they said, yeah, well, that's what my job. You have these consultants that are not even doctors, and then they have this long dialogue with you, and I found out that, we were working together in all those cases. Okay, let's go find something in effect by hand. But they were still steering me down the wrong direction. So then I said, okay, it's not going to be one of those. Of course, I tried clinicaltrials.gov directly, and then all of the, in the UK, we have this one called ISR CTN, and then there's EU CTR, and then there's ICTRP. I was even looking at ANZ CTR. And so I'm doing that directly, and then I'm also, there's coincidentally, right at the same time, all of these AI-based open source matchers, not products, but research efforts. And so my day job, still my day job, so to speak, even though I'm spending far more time on CancerBot, is AI and large language models to do skills extraction for large companies. So I said, okay, let me just go host these things and I'll find a match that way. And unfortunately, they were worse because what they did is they said, okay, we're going to take a patient vignette, which of course is not all your data. It's just, 50-year-old man, follicular lymphoma, otherwise healthy, 7-centimeter tumor. What do you think is a good trial? And then what they would do is they take this curated data set. Most of them use TREC 2022, which is a small data set of roughly 50 different symptoms. And so if you say you have follicular lymphoma, it says, oh, out of these 50, one of these is follicular lymphoma. That's the best one. And then it says, okay, the way that they measure goodness, or like did you work or not, is the thing that the trial matcher recommends is the doctor, the clinician gold standard, what the doctor says is the best match within the top 5 of what's there. Well, it better be. If it's not 100%, something's deeply wrong. So, of course, what you want instead is accurate clinical trial matching based on all the patient attributes and all the inclusion and exclusion eligibility criteria from the trial. So after looking at this, I said, okay, this needs to exist. First step is to just go build a database that's the true structured database from all of these sources: clinicaltrials.gov, ISRCTN, UCTR, ICTRP, and all of them, and get true structured database. And this just needs to exist. I had no idea what this was going to turn into at the time. Just said this needs to exist. Maybe I can give it away to clinicaltrials.gov. Who knows? At the same time, my father, you don't even know this story, Steve, I don't think. My father was diagnosed with colon cancer, and while I was building it, and my dad has a stent. He was a very vital professor. He's taught for 50 years at University of Louisville at this time as a history professor, and teaching a full load, extremely vital, but obese and not a candidate for chemotherapy. Well, they put him on chemotherapy, and within 3 days he was dead. So that happened, and then my sister-in-law, this is the upside, the good story is that my sister-in-law gets cancer. She was given 3 months to live. She went, I didn't even know she did this, she went and found a trial of proton beam therapy, went to live in San Diego for a month. She's in complete remission. She's completely healthy. And her doctor flew down to San Diego to talk her out of doing the trial. Her primary care doctor. So, that's her with all this, she was a nurse and she was very experienced. She was able to find something that was a good fit when all her doctors had given up on her. So I said, okay, at that point it became the vast majority of my time, and I said, okay, I'm going to build this thing that does true eligibility matching, true micro matching of using this database, right, with all the attributes. You match all the patient attributes to it. So I'm just going to tell you 5 big things about this. I would love to see people here using CancerBot, but my hope is, since everybody seems to want to build a clinical trial matcher, and that's a good thing. I hope lots of people, I hope some of your students are building them. That's great. But I have 5 precepts, and when I started doing this, I had worked with Steve before. I was on the board of HealthTree, helping them build, on a volunteer basis, build predictive models for standard of care. Completely, somewhat unrelated thing. And I reached out to Steve, told him about this. He said, oh, you need to join DCI Network. I heard the vision of this pilot that they want to do, clinical trial matching. I said, let me just give this all to the pilot. And we're also giving it all to all these foundations. But there's 5 principles that we're following that I hope, if you're building your own clinical trial matcher, I hope you use some of the stuff that we have, that we've built. We're building it component-wise so people can just pick pieces. So one of the things I've learned with DCI Network is you love to do your corny backronyms. No, some clever backronyms. I do corny backronyms, you do clever backronyms. So my corny backronym is BEGIN. The first step is use a bot to drive that patient interview. Even if you get the data from Epic MyChart and CancerBot supports MyChart, it's never going to be complete. So use a bot to elicit the information from the patient and drive it towards not necessarily everything about the patient, but enough to do the clinical trial matching. Because there's a lot of stuff you might think you need in a full patient record, but you focus in on what they need. As they get close to a trial, ask the questions that you need to make them eligible for the most trials. The second thing is eligibility. Drive true eligibility for exact matches. This is E. BEGIN, BE, eligibility for exact matching. The third thing is goodness. Now that you separated eligibility, now that you have 100% eligibility, you can actually evaluate goodness. How good is the patient? And instead of just using that, the clinician gold standard says, oh, I think it's good for this, use what the patient cares about. Every patient has different preferences in terms of, is a trial about lowest risk, highest benefit, lowest burden, or lowest distance? That's one of the things I learned from working with foundation navigators. Call it distance as its own thing. So if you're building your own matcher, you make sure the patient can do agency about what is important for them, for goodness. The fourth thing is is interoperability. If you're going to get these best-of-breed components to do things like, rating goodness or doing eligibility, store it in a standard way. Read from FHIR, store it in OMOP. We're doing some work with DCI Network to enhance OMOP, to make it even easier to build clinical trial matchers by flattening it out. We're going to do a workshop tomorrow that discusses that. And the fifth one, something I had to learn is, as frustrated as I was with my doctors, as I've been giving away to foundations, I've been meeting with all these people that are navigators. So when you build the bot and you're trying to guide the patients and get illicit information, your persona, if you're going to build your own matcher, should be a navigator, or sometimes called a nurse navigator. And you should be building it so that it can also integrate the navigator to help the patients with that.